Hello, everyone. We'll just give it a minute as people are joining. Hello, welcome. Hello. Yeah, we'll just give it one more moment. All right, so let's get started. Hi, so my name is Jillian Avendano. I'm the program director at FIU Center for International Business Education and Research. We are a Title VI grant from the U.S. Department of Education with the purpose of promoting U.S. competitiveness in international business. We have an exciting topic today, which is global migration as an economic pathway. And it's a great topic and is very timely. We've always been a globe on the move, and currently there are more than 280 million global migrants in the world, representing nearly 4% of the world's population. People have always moved in search of better livelihood opportunities, safety, and prosperity. More recently, people are also migrating from conflicts and climate disasters. The USA, along with Canada, Germany, and other EU countries, are top destination for global migrants. For many of these countries, global migration is a boost to their economies as migrants mitigate demographic and labor declines in many of these countries, boosting the country's growth and innovation. Therefore, migration can be an economic pathway both for the family migrating and the country that's receiving the migrants. To explain this phenomenon more, we have three experts from the global migration world that will be talking to us. But first, we'd like to show you a video which explains this a little bit. And at the end, also, I just wanted to add that we'll be answering any questions that you have, so you can add questions in the chat or the Q&A box. And Dr. Pissaris, would you like to share the video? There we are. Yeah, so that video shows the distance that migrants are traveling when they're migrating. And then I'd like to invite my colleague, Dr. Luciana Kube, to introduce our speakers.
Hello, good morning, everyone. We are so happy at FIU CIBER to have today three specialists. I will start introducing Dr. Seema Pissaris, who is a professor of management at FIU, where she teaches courses in strategy, entrepreneurship, and leadership at the graduate and undergraduate levels. Dr. Pissaris has been an avid entrepreneur responsible for launching numerous successful companies. Her experience of transforming startups into large businesses has informed her research on leadership and strategic management. Her research has been published in numerous publications and presented at national and international conferences. Dr. Pissaris is also an avid volunteer serving civil society organizations in many countries. She has advised global leaders on how to formulate strategies that improve the quality of life for peoples in India, Afghanistan, Tajikistan, Russia, USA, Canada, and others. Her work spans projects in poverty alleviation, business and professional development, education, and migration and settlement. We also have Seema Martínez Araujo, who has a master in business communication, specialized in digital technologies at the Universidad Pompeu Fabra in Barcelona, Spain. She's also specialized in the bachelor's in audiovisual media. from the Universidad Católica Andes Bello in Caracas, Venezuela, where she started her career in the communication world. Currently, she is the communications coordinator in the International Organization for Migration in the Dominican Republic. In this role, Zinnia has elaborated campaigns and communication plans that have been effective, contributing to the success of the organization in the humanitarian action and support for migrants. Before that role, Zinnia Martínez worked in the journalistic and academic realm in Venezuela as a university professor, and also sharing her knowledge and passion as a reporter in the El Nacional and El Universal newspapers. And last but not least, I want to introduce you to Ashish Machant, who has been the vice chairman of the Aga Khan Foundation's National Committee in India for the last 8 years. In this capacity, he has led various community projects to improve the quality of life of families using levels of education, nutrition, facilitated migration, habitat, social infrastructure, youth development, and other such. Prior to this, Ashish served as a director of the Aga Khan Rural Support Program in India for 3 years. He was instrumental in introducing a quality of life assessment tool that was widely used to inform programming in India, Russia, Tajikistan, and Afghanistan, among other jurisdictions. Professionally, Ashish has been a marketing consultant and has implemented CRM strategies, loyalty program design, and direct marketing using Western Union financial services in the USA for about 5 years. Most of his time after that, he has spent consulting for brands like Pantaloons, Godrej, Raymond, Kodak, Metro Shoes, Ranbaxy, Nerolac Paints, Flipkart, and Deutsche Bank in the areas of loyalty program. She's also co-founder of 2 startups, Points for People and Takato Dry Cleaners. One is a platform empowering members of loyalty programs to donate their reward points to charitable causes, and the other is a doorstep laundry serving Mumbai. Ashish has an MBA with specializations in marketing and computer information systems from the University of Rochester, a postgraduate diploma in advanced business and analytics from the IT Mumbai, and a postgraduate diploma in marketing research analytics from MICA, Ahmedabad. His bachelor's degree is from the University of Mumbai in financial accounting and auditing. Welcome, and thank you.
Thank you, Luciana, and thank you to our distinguished panelists. So let's get started with some questions. The first question I have will be for Ashish. Can you provide some context from your experience and viewpoint on global migration?
Sure. Thank you very much for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here. Look, I think when one talks of migration, the images that typically conjure up are the ones of refugees and people in strife and distress, right? And it's fair. You have a lot of internally displaced individuals whom we care for and we want to accommodate. But actually, and some of the research that even Seema and I have worked on demonstrates that migration can be a very powerful economic tool for progressing a nation. I know we in India are actually very lucky because we are perhaps the largest recipient of remittances in the world. It's about 100 billion. And I think then next is Mexico at about some 50 or 60 billion dollars and thereabouts, right? And so while migration in some ways sometimes gets perceived as a tool of charity or as an act of goodness, actually global migration can be a powerful economic lever for progressing societies, both the receiving country as well as the sending country. And the more these things play themselves out, it becomes a nice virtuous loop. We've worked on multiple migration tracks within the AKDN network. During Idi Amin's time in 1972, we had people who migrated from East Africa into North America and Western Europe. Many of them today and their families serve as senators, lawyers, doctors, and large business house owners and founders, right? Or people even from Afghanistan, right? When the meltdown happened, some of them just escaped and some of them came to New Delhi. We worked with the UNHCR. We're very grateful for their support. A lot of them moved to Canada afterwards. And today they're actually contributing back to quality of life of people in Afghanistan. So this is something that's not unidimensional. And if one views it as a tool for progress, economic progress, it can become extremely powerful to improve quality of life, both at the receiving end and at the sending end, Jillian. So thanks for that question.
Yeah, thank you. Wonderful answer. So next question, I think will be for Zinnia. So the UNHCR helps with inflows from across the globe and is an exemplary civil society participant. Can you provide some examples of some success stories in the countries where you work?
Thank you for having me, for the invitation. And yes, I work for IOM, who, well, as a UN organization, we work together with UNHCR for example, for the R4B platform. The R4B is a platform we work together for giving response to the Venezuelan migrants, refugees and migrants from Venezuela. And it is responding to this Venezuelan migrant here in Dominican Republic, but also in the 17 countries where most of the Venezuelans are, because we are all around the globe, but mostly in 17 countries. And yes, we're responding to a big exodus, one of the most big exodus in the history, that is the Venezuelans, because there is 7.1 million Venezuelans living outside the country. So we are working in responding to their living conditions, security, dignity, and health. Also, working in ways to help to this huge migration. So throughout the years, here at IOM Dominican Republic, for example, we have worked tirelessly to identify solutions and sustainable livelihood for Venezuelans. And one of the effective strategies that we have implemented here is supporting for entrepreneurship. So we are providing initial supplies to offering trainings and guidance, but we also have worked with them, with the Venezuelan migrant community, and to boost their entrepreneurial initiative. So this approach has not only empowered many migrants, but primarily women, to start their own businesses. And so that's part of what we are doing together, UNHCR and IOM. That just here in Dominican Republic, but this response goes, as I said, for 17 countries. And for example, in Colombia and Peru, there is also shelter solutions, because there's too many people walking for the whole region, and also crossing the Darien Gap, whereas unfortunately there are thousands of people still crossing the Darien Gap. So part of our solutions are sheltering solutions and also information, which is what I think, as a communicator, I think is very, very important part of what we do, to help them to make their migration route the better it can be. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. So the next question, I think should be for Seema. So one of the fundamental factors of migration success is having an economic pathway. Some countries are better at offering economic pathways, and some migrants are better at charting this path. What are the factors to success, or of success, sorry?
Thank you. Thanks, Jillian, for the question and for holding this important webinar. I also want to include say hello to all the participants. We're really delighted that you're here today and that you've joined this webinar today. I hope that you ask lots of good questions. Please use the chat box, as Jillian has pointed out, because we want this to be an interactive webinar, and we would love for you to participate in this webinar. Ashish started with talking about how migration is beneficial for both the country and the migrant. Zinnia talked a little bit about the challenges that migrants face as they come into the countries, right? And she talked about some of the essential services that IOM and UNHCR provide. But as Ashish mentioned, that if we stay with that migrant long enough, we can see success, both for the country and for the migrant. So for example, we have an estimated 50 million migrants in the United States. It's a really big number, right? And research tells us that migrants are 80% more likely to start a business than native-born Americans. Think about that, right? That is a huge difference. If you go to any metro area in a large city, New York, Chicago, Atlanta, Miami, you will see that migrants account for about half of the retail businesses on any main street, right? But it's more than retail. Migrants also do big things. Migrants have founded 65% of the leading AI companies in the world, right? So, you know, as Ashish mentioned, sometimes when we think of migrants, we think of those folks that are traveling with, you know, bags in their hands, walking miles and miles. And while that is true, and you saw in the opening video how far some migrants come, you can see that there is a lot that they contribute to the economy which is their destination, right? And so what causes success? Because not all migrants are successful, and sometimes the success is delayed. So what does the research say, going back to Jillian's question? The first one is the English language. We have found time and time again, across economies, across countries, that opportunities are presented in the English language. And a working knowledge of the English language is extremely important, right? So folks that come in with some kind of a working knowledge of English language are much more attuned to opportunities and are much more able to land on their feet compared to folks who have to start from scratch. So that's the first one, right? The second one is an entrepreneurial background. And so these are the folks that have some experience, that have some skill set, whether in terms of employment or in entrepreneurship, they do better. Because when they first arrive into a country, they feel that their employment opportunities are more limited than their entrepreneurial opportunities. They feel that they can present themselves better through their own business, and they can have a little bit more control in their direction, in their trajectory. And so entrepreneurial skills and specific skills in specific sectors do well. And then, of course, you have the qualitative, right? Such as risk-taking, such as understanding how to bring value to a particular market. You know, all of those different entrepreneurial and innovation skills assist entrepreneurs to get onto that, assist global migrants to get onto that economic pathway.
Thank you very much. The next question is for all the panelists. Is it possible to prepare migrants for success before they migrate?
I'll take a shot at that because we've been doing this for a while now. The answer is yes. And I'm going to say something which may sound a little queasy, but I'll still take the shot at it, right? You know, Seema's absolutely right. You know, things like the language of English is powerful. So just for context, within the AKDN, we don't only help migration within countries or you know, to different countries, but also within the country. So if you're living in, let's say, a village in Western Gujarat, experiences a lot of seismic activity and has low economic opportunity, we would help people migrate from there, let's say, to to Telangana state in the city of Hyderabad, where perhaps their credentialed education and their language competencies could give them a leg up and a fair shot at progress in life and give their children a better shot at education. Now, when you think about that, how do you prepare? You take somebody from a village in Western Gujarat and put them into a city in Hyderabad. You know, they're going to be intimidated, right? Their food habits are different. Their travel habits are different, right? So what we do is typically we create what I call receiving teams. And so these are volunteers of ours who come from those centers where people intend to migrate and travel to the villages and describe what it's going to be like, right? And then when people come in there, they will actually receive them saying, welcome, you're now in my domain. Let me show you what I told you. And you underwrite the emotional safety for the first few weeks. That emotional safety initially, this whole notion of, we loosely use the words mentoring and motivation. These are very powerful terms because when you think about it, yes, you need credentialed education. Yes, you need access to finance. Yes, you need a network to go and start a business. But this notion of just feeling safe, which comes through the layers of mentoring and motivation, become extremely powerful. And so what we try to do within the network is whenever there's migration, we take people from the receiving areas who volunteer to travel to the sending areas. and get people comfortable personally and culturally. And then the information layering starts taking place and things become a lot easier. Of course, there's information. You say, look, the school's going to be different. Your hours going to be longer. Your commute will be in mass transit, which you may not be used to. All of that information is important. But if they're emotionally safe and feel comfortable, frankly, we've surprised ourselves to seek the power of motivation and mentoring. So I wanted to get that in first because I just feel so passionately about it, in addition to English language that Seema talked about. So, but I'll stop there, Jillian, but that's my immediate response to your question.
Thank you. And Zinnia, did you have a response? Yeah.
Yes, I'll have to say that I firmly believe in the power of information. I think that a well-informed decision can be the difference between success or failure. If from IOM we work all the time in initiatives to share information about the countries, about their path to job opportunities, legal requirements, their visa steps. A person who makes an informed decision can definitely have a better result in its migration path. And also we have tried with phone apps, all kind of formats and ways to make this information available for everybody. So I would say that's a communicator, but what we think that can be a success for migrants to be informed.
And Seema, what are your thoughts on this?
I see we've got a couple of questions in the chat, and Dr. Sumit Kundu has written that migration has a negative connotation, right? He says it refers to people who do not find opportunities in their home country and people who do not have high skills. There's another segment of population that is highly skilled, such as engineers, doctors, computer science professionals. This is related to brain drain. As countries develop, opportunities open up, and there is a reverse brain drain. How is the above connected to reverse migration? So let me first address the first part of the question. And I think this is part of the kind of the gap that we're trying to bridge, right? How do we flip the narrative of migration from one of poor people leaving poor countries with zero skills to destination countries receiving quality labor, receiving an economic uplift whilst assisting families to improve the quality of their life? Right? That's a very different narrative. And so how do we do that? So I think one of the first things, as we said, is to prepare the migrants. Ashish talked about preparing migrants, through receiving teams, to providing them with mental safety, right? Mental and physical safety. We can also prepare them in terms of transit countries. Oftentimes, migrants will travel, and you saw in the opening video, thousands of miles to get to their destination country. And they will stop in transit countries. So on the way to Germany, for example, which we talked about in our opening, they will stop in Pakistan, in Iran, in Turkey, in Greece, and then make their way up through Europe. So what can we do in some of those transit countries? So AKDN also operating there, for example, in Turkey, which is a transit country, because Turkey is not giving any migrants any asylum status in that country. It is just simply to hold, to prep, and then potentially to move forward. AKDN is looking at right now, currently, as we speak, they're providing skills education. They're providing vocational skills. A large portion of that population who originated from Afghanistan would like to end up in Canada. And Canada has some great programs in terms of where they will accept migrants, what kind of migrants they will accept. It works through a point system. So for language, for vocational skills that are need or necessary for Canada, they get higher points. And so these are great ways for migrants to aspire to a particular place. And at the same time, we can assist in prepping them, right? And I think that we'll talk a little bit more about this, further into our webinar, but I think that multiple countries can participate, and we can create policies around how we we expedite that process so that migrants are skilled even before they enter the country. And that will help us to flip that narrative.
Thank you. So I see we have a lot of great questions. I'm going to ask one more question, then we can get into the questions that are being asked. What are some of the common challenges that migrants face? And what can organizations, countries, and policymakers do to alleviate these? And this is for all of the panelists.
Well, I would say that legal pathways to documentation, that's the most common challenge. And yes, many of them have to struggle with the regular ways to enter and stay a country. And I would say that solution, that's something we work all the time with the governments and the policymakers, is to create a more accessible legal pathways, reduce bureaucratic barriers, or make the information more available, and make this way to the legal pathway more approachable for migrants. I would say that's one of the challenges, and another one is social integration that we just talked. Making countries more open to all the contributions migrants can do or can add to the country and make it better. And that's talking a little bit about the narrative. We have worked with journalists because we think a huge part of this narrative or this work to flip the narrative, we have to do it with mass media, because it's a big part of this negative narrative is that migration is all most of the time related to criminals and these kind of things. And so we're working with journalists. So this is a process, that needs policymakers, governments, journalists, and the whole society working together to make the most of this reality of this that is not going to change. I mean, there are every day there are more people migrating, working for a better life, and looking for better opportunities, of course.
I'd like to add, Zinnia, you made some excellent points on what the receiving country can do as a policy framework to take advantage of migration. I'll go to the other side, and we've seen this within the country. So within India, we have centers like Mumbai, which pays about a third of the income tax of the entire country. So there's a lot of economic activity. And then there are geographies like Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, which may not be as active. And a lot of people migrate from those states into these metros of Delhi and Gurgaon and Bombay to work. What we've done in the Aga Khan Development Network is we go into the remotest areas of these states where there's limited economic opportunity, and we start young. Neuroscience has shown that the brain of an individual gets developed almost 80% by the time the child is 36 months old. And so early childhood development becomes extremely critical. And so when you start giving them enough stimulus, when there are physical stimulus, right, singing, dancing, music, you give them things like numeracy and literacy exposure. You ensure that their nutrition is well taken care of so that there's no iron deficiency, especially there's anemia during prenatal or postpartum. You ensure that the brain power is sharp enough so that when you start giving primary and secondary education, the human resource capacity is strong. Education is important, but can only be as useful as the capacity of the individual. And so I think those of us who are large emitters of human resources have an obligation to ensure that the human resource capacity is strong. And so while the receiving countries can make good income pathways and laws to ensure better reception of migrants, and countries like Canada and Portugal do a brilliant job of accepting migrants and integrating them, right? But on the sending side, so countries like India, I think we have an obligation to ensure the human resource capacity is strong. And so we focus heavily on early childhood development to ensure that the brain power is sharpened early on. So by the time the child is 15 or 16, she or he has the capacity, whether they migrate within the country or outside, to take on unknown territory. The other piece, which is most important, and we try this very hard as well, is to dispel this fear of the unknown. very often when you're in bad circumstances, you're in fear. And so if something is different or alien, you start having fear and you almost start hating it in some ways, right? So what we've done in most of our schools of the Akhan network, or even early childhood centers, we ensure that people meet people of different types. You talk about different festivals, you talk about different skin color, you talk about gender, but very gently through stories and role play, you introduce the notion of diversity. So God willing, when this person is in a context which is not very familiar, it doesn't scare them. It almost excites them. And so I think if the focus on early childhood development with nutrition for sharpening brain power and the exposure to pluralism early on through stories and plays creates enough human resource capacity at the emitting side to then plug in towards Zinnia, what you said at the receiving side. And I think both have a responsibility and an obligation to make it work. I hope that helps. But thanks for those remarks. Yeah.
That's really great. I just like to add, so Ashish talked about what the sending countries can do, right? Now, when we receive them in the US and other countries, we have to have a very similar view to the pluralism, right? To the diversity of the folks that we're getting in, and understand the cultural differences. And there's significant cultural differences, even in terms of how we look at money, how we look at credit, how we look at lending, right? So for example, in some of the research that I looked at in a post-COVID environment, what type of businesses, survived COVID and maybe even thrived a little bit post-COVID, and what type of businesses completely, shut down. And it turned out that, certain segments of migrant businesses were more likely to close than native-born businesses. And the reason for that was because they had much more trouble in terms of accessing funding, right? Accessing debt funding, hiring quality human resources, creating long-term advisory partnerships, right? Particularly during challenging years, to have that mentorship coming through. So how can we, on the receiving end, make sure that we understand the cultural nuances in terms of, how do these communities prefer to borrow? In terms of their borrowing, what comes along with that? Can we provide mentoring? So it's not just access to funding, but it's access to growth and development, right? And, we found, for example, that, many migrant businesses were not even taking advantage of the government benefits that native-born business owners were taking advantage of fully. So how do we do that? Zinnia talked about communication, right? Getting the word out. But we need to get the word out in a culturally sensitive way so that it's internalized. There are cultural ambassadors, cultural representatives that make sure that a lot of these benefits are then utilized by the more vulnerable potentially, and certainly by the newly arrived or the more migrant community. So these are some of the things I think that we can do from a policy point of view.
So I see we have quite a few questions in the Q&A box. So I guess I'll start with the first one from Farhan Kyoja. I have does entrepreneurship skills by migrants are built by their earlier experiences such that they find arbitrage problem opportunities in the developed nation? Maybe that since their entrepreneurship skills are coming from their previous experiences in their home country, that maybe they find problems when going to a developed nation that maybe doesn't use this. I don't know if I'm reading that correctly.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I can start. So Farhan, I have seen this. I have seen entrepreneurs able to identify better in terms of problem identification. I've also seen this difference in gender. I speak to a lot of small business owners, and I'll speak to kind of the the patriarch of the family who's running it in the finances. But then I'll speak to the female, and she'll talk to me about products, and she'll talk to me about shelf space, and she'll talk to me about what specific customer segments are looking for. So I think that yes, are we built differently? Do we have different experiences when we're growing up? Absolutely. And I think that's one of the reasons why immigrant entrepreneurs do better when they go into a new country, because they're able to bring those new skills or those skills that are lesser found in their destination countries. However, I think we need to pave the way for them, right? Because those skills alone don't provide sufficient economies to move forward, right? I think we need other access to pathways, such as credit, such as language, such as integration into that new community, so that they're then able to employ those skills, so that there's a bridging of the gap. And I totally believe that institutions like FIU, universities, academia, government, they all play a role in enabling those pathways. So I'll invite my other panelists to add on, or you can move to the next question.
I would say that from our experience working with entrepreneurs and here in Dominican Republic, that there is another thing about it is access to loans and credit, and even to bank accounts, to create bank accounts is not easy here in Dominican Republic. So they can to make it their companies or their small businesses legal has been a challenge. It is a challenge, still a challenge. So we have working with them to help them to get to that point, that it definitely has to be something that we can work with government and the private institutions, bank institutions, that to understand their situation and make it a way to help them with loans and credits and this kind of small businesses.
Ashish, did you have anything that you wanted to add before we go to the next question?
I'll make a comment here, and it's a bit of a tangent, but it's important, right? There was some fantastic research conducted by, I think it was Pew, and it got published in the New York Times, which talked about how individuals perceive religion. And it was fascinating, right? Because most of us tend to think that the youth today are less religious, and older people tend to be more religious, right? That's the notion. Actually, the research discovered that in about 80% of the world, which is largely the developing countries where a significant population lives below $2 a day, the youth are actually very religious. The only difference is, while people above 50 view churches and mosques as places to go and pray, the youth actually view these places as providers of tools for improvement of quality of life, right? So it's the soft and the hard. So when you look at some of the interventions that Zinnia was describing, right? For instance, access to finance, or what Dr. Seema was saying in terms of mentoring on networks, right? How do you get that? The government will not know when somebody walks in fresh what to give. The financial institutions will not know what to exactly do because they have a template. But if you see the church groups or the religious affiliation groups, there is a warm heart that's willing to bridge what's available in the country to the person that's there. In the introduction you read out, I worked for about 5 years with Western Union, and I've seen a lot of these migrant communities where the cultural and the religious groups help organize themselves so that, hey, Mr. Bank, here's a fresh migrant. Yes, they don't have a credit history, but here's 3 of us who stand guarantee. You can go ahead and help them. Oh, and by the way, Mr. Entrepreneur, I know you used to make flat bread and sell on the streets. It's not permitted here. You'll have to rent a shop. Here's what it costs. Don't worry, you don't have credit history. I'll sign your lease for the first month, right? If you see the role of religious groups and just flip that around, they can become very powerful, what I would say, receiving teams, right, of sorts, because they have both the motivation and the means to assist. And we've seen in our work that people who step out to assist others typically will do very well themselves because they develop all the leadership competencies that help them progress themselves. So I know this is a bit of a tangent, but if you think about it, if you go out and help immigrant entrepreneurs, what we've seen is chances are you'll do much better in life yourself, and the entrepreneur will benefit because you're doing a triage, right? So I wanted to get that nuance in. We've seen this so powerfully in so many countries around the world. It's unmistakable, but there's very little documentation around it. But I think it's important, it's extremely important. So Jillian, I wanted to get that in.
Thank you. So I have another question from, and I appreciate everybody typing their questions, and we don't always get this many questions. So We have definitely an engaged audience, which we're excited about. So next question is from Paola Cardona. She says, how can we challenge or change the common perception that immigrants take away jobs and instead shift the narrative to highlight the various contributions and benefits immigrants bring to society? I like that. And that would be for all the panelists.
Yes.
How do we change the
A
perception?
huge challenge. Yes, that's something that we work and we try every day. That's our huge, big challenge here in Dominican Republic, but around the world. And it is, we have tried all kind of things, but mostly telling the other stories, you know, that what we were just talking about, the success story, the entrepreneur stories, the stories that all the reasons that move people that are not always that I am lacking opportunities in my country. Sometimes it's love, for example. Sometimes it's educational opportunities. Sometimes it's jobs. I mean, there are many reasons to move, reasons for people to move to other countries or even inside their countries, because we believe that migrants are not only the people who goes out of their countries. Even when you move inside your country, you are also a migrant, and you are lacking also that network that we are lacking with we are out of our countries. We have, for example, here in Dominican Republic, we are right now working in a platform that we call Xenophobia Zero, xenophobiazero.org, or where Xenophobia Zero is working with communities of organizations, trying to flip the narrative, not, you know, feeding the trolls, not answering to them, but telling the good stories, the good practices, telling the stories of love or of solidarity. And that's what we are trying to, you know, make communities to talk about this, not only the bad part of the thing, the migration, but also about, for example, here we have a huge orchestra of Venezuelan musicians. I mean, I think that the whole world benefited from the Venezuelan migrants from music, because we have a huge system of musicians. Even Luciana, who's there, sitting there, is a musician from Venezuela. And I'm sure the University of Florida is benefiting from that. And that's it, a lot of Venezuelan migrants working with music education. So we share those stories. And also we have here in Dominican Republic, people from Haiti, who most of them work with, you know, agricultural sectors and also building houses, but also doctors, engineers, people who works in sports. We have a huge, big stars, sports stars. So we are working in telling those stories too, and make it more popular and broad, you know, yes, the audience, and telling this the love in work, battling the hate with love. That's what we do in Xenophobia Zero. So I invite you to come to visit xenophobiazero.org.
Zinnia, can you share the link on the chat for everyone
Yes.
to copy it, please?
Yes, sure.
We can see the love narrative. I
Yes.
love that.
And then I'll go ahead and ask the next question now, because we have quite a few questions and not a ton of time. So I have Noran Siani, and sorry if I've mispronounced anyone's name. And they ask, how do you equip yourself with financial security when you join the Western world, where of course the residents have priority over immigrants, like in a recent job cutoff in mega companies? So yes, they're asking how do they equip themselves for financial security when migrating to the Western world?
Sure. So I'll try and take a stab at this. I think when I think of financial security, one of the first things that I think about is financial literacy, right? And it's important for migrants, this is another preparation point that we can consider, to understand how to be financially literate, right? Just like, English literacy, financial literacy is very important. And if we start early enough, then we can at least have, the cognitive basis for it. We can look at finance, as a necessary item that we all have to learn about from an early age, right? I think now, financial literacy is started in ECD, right? I've seen, needs and wants and savings and things like that. And so I think if we have migrants with a good grasp of financial literacy, then that can be something that, that can serve them as they enter the new country. And maybe this is something that transit countries can do. This is something that, Ashish spoke of religious or faith-based organizations or non-governmental organizations, right? Civil society and faith-based organizations have a real role to play in some of this preparation. And so I think that would be the same. The other thing, that I want you to consider and to think about, and Zinnia talked a little bit about this, is by telling stories, right? That the narrative is changing. And part of those stories, if you look, you'll see some of our largest companies in the USA have an immigrant CEO, right? The CEO of some of our, largest tech companies even are being run by immigrants. And so I think that the narrative is changing. I think that folks are beginning to understand that these immigrants bring skill, they bring innovation, but I think that it needs to be told and retold over and over again so that we are then able to flip that. And that also migrants would need to feel confident in their own abilities so that they can then fight the good fight, right? If they feel that they're not getting their share of benefits, that other folks are, then I think it's important to equip them on how to fight that good fight, right? I'll leave it to my panelists to add.
Well, I agree. The only comment I'll make is, Seema, you're so right. Sometimes, I think Warren Buffett once said, right? After a certain age, you ignore what people say and you look at their track record, right? And so you're so right that sometimes you need to let time play itself out, right? We don't control the time frame. But when you look at the evidence, when the Japanese cars first came into the United States, they were cheaper alternatives to the General Motors of the world and the Fords of the world. Today, Toyota and Honda are synonymous with quality. And about 25 years ago, the Kias and the Hyundais started becoming the cheaper alternatives to the Toyotas and the Hondas. And today, they are synonymous with quality. And so sometimes you need to let it play itself out. Tell the story, but back it up with track record, and people will listen. People inherently, human beings are good creatures, right? But they need the evidence to be able to believe, right? It's an unknown, and you're so right that let's tell the story, let's back it up with evidence, and you're right. The Sundar Pichais of the world, or the Satya Nadellas of the world, become great stories to talk about. So I'm completely with you.
Thank you. We have quite a few questions. I don't know if we'll be able to get to all of them, but we're going to try. Let's see. So Dayala Kabara says, thank you for the interesting webinar. As you have mentioned, migrants face several challenges: language, entrepreneurial skills to undertake entrepreneurial activities. What about female migrants who face extra challenges to make work-life balances? And then how do you think female migrants may overcome these different challenges? I think this is actually a challenge for everyone too, is for females doing a work-life balance.
So, I'll try and attempt this one. I think that when I see female entrepreneurs, one of their big motivation to become an entrepreneur is work-life balance. I'll have to tell you, right? I have females who are, because I teach the grad level course in entrepreneurship, and as you know, FIU has more female students than males. So, 2/3 of my class are oftentimes females in an entrepreneurial course, right? And so obviously the question to motivation always comes up: passion, motivation, risk-taking, etc. And I find that the women are interested in the work-life balance. So they're not interested in founding a billion-dollar company. It's great if it will happen, but that's not their goal. Whereas certainly when I talk to my male students, they're interested in founding the billion-dollar company. The female students are interested in, I want to be able to get home and pick up my children from school. I want to be able to spend time with my kids. And I can't do that if I'm working. I can do that if I have my own business. And a lot have managed this, right? And so I think, in fact, entrepreneurship provides a pathway, if done well, for better work-life balance. I think women also have an intuitive sense in terms of how to bring value to market, right? And so I think women bring certain, skills inherent, and maybe I'm gender biased, that I have seen repeatedly over and over again, that inspires me, frankly. And then I think the last message, and I've said this before, is that as a woman who is an entrepreneur, I would say to other women entrepreneurs, don't aim for daily work-life balance. Aim for, a lifetime of work-life balance. So maybe in the first few years of your entrepreneurial adventure, you will not achieve this. And I can be pretty confident in saying you will not achieve this, because it's so hard, because time is required. But over time, you will achieve it, right? Over time, that entrepreneurial venture, which is, like giving birth to anything, like your child, right? It will then provide you with sufficient independence that you could gain it over time. So for women who look at their day-to-day schedule and say, I haven't spent enough time with my child, or I haven't finished cleaning the house, or I haven't, it's okay. It'll slide, but it will not slide for a lifetime. It'll slide in periods, and over periods, you will achieve that balance. And I think if women remember this, we are less tough on ourselves, so that's my tip.
Excellent response. So the next question is from Diana Londoño. We have, as an immigrant, I've noticed that newcomers bring diverse cultural influences to their new country. This blend could be beneficial, yet there's a possibility it may dilute the country's distinct culture. In Colombia, my home country, the arrival of many Venezuelans has been beneficial, but has also presented challenges due to the cultural differences. I wonder, does this blending of culture compromise the host country's own cultural essence, or is it problematic, mainly problematic? Additionally, what measures can be taken to ease cultural tensions?
Well, I would say that culture is something that evolves, that is something that is around the time, and it is the result of the differences, but also the evolving of these differences. For us Venezuelans, we received a lot of Colombians during the 1980s. And yes, we share a lot of cultural background, but we also add their music, their food, their cultural manifestations to ours. And I think it happens in all countries. Talking about a culture that can be, maintained during the years, I think it is impossible. It changes with the time, it changes and it evolves. It has, yes, some roots, but also it feeds all this cultural feed what we call our culture. I don't know what my panelists fellows think about it.
No, Zinnia, I couldn't agree with you more.
I'd like to add something, if I might.
Sorry, please go ahead.
No, you go ahead, and then I can add something. If
Yeah, no,
possible.
I wanted to agree with Zinnia. Look, for people who are familiar with the Aga Khan Development Network, we have a huge initiative on music. We have a huge initiative on sports. We perhaps give out the single largest award for music every 4 years. It's equivalent of the Nobel Prize for Music that we do, just like we do for architecture. And the reason we do that is exactly for the reasons Zinnia just described. we found that in a space where you're viewing it as a binary, it's my culture or yours, and in my diluting mine versus yours, people often fail to realize that when things come together, it actually becomes a very, very rich tapestry, and both become very rich. And so if you see the last few Aga Khan Music Awards, the last one that was held in Oman and the one prior to that was held in Portugal, you had musicians from Africa, from mountain countries, from East Asia, from North America, all coming together to create music, which was so rich because there was a blend. And so I would say that music and sports becomes extremely powerful. All barriers shut down, everybody's competing and having fun. But it's important, it's extremely critical to create the enabling physical spaces for this. Some of you may be familiar that we recently restored a 90-acre park in the heart of New Delhi, right? Which is called the Sundar Nursery. We just won the award from the United Nations for that as well. And the reason we did that is because in a city like Delhi, where there's so much of migration coming from different parts of India, culturally very diverse, you could walk into a Sundar Nursery, and besides all the flora and the fauna and the birds and the kingfishers and the peacocks, you also see perhaps a young lady in a pair of jeans, writing her poetry. And you see a family, perhaps where the lady's in a hijab with the two kids, having their picnic snack, besides somebody who's perhaps painting the Humayun's tomb, which you can view from there, right? That physical space to allow the blend of all of them coming together, and they're eating food which is different, buying gift items which represent cultures of centuries. It's a very, very rich tapestry. So diversity is not something to be feared. In our belief, it's something actually to be celebrated. And we need to very powerfully use the levers of music and sports, and have the physical spaces to enable that to happen. It can become very powerful. So I'm completely with you over there, Zinnia.
Oh, yes. I just wanted to say that at FIU CIBER, we hosted recently a workshop for K-12 teachers, for high school teachers, in person at FIU about Colombia, with the collaboration of ProColombia from the embassy. And we discussed this topic about borders and geographical regions, as for example, how the Andean mountain ranges and the Amazon unites us more than separating us, and the borders are arbitrary formulations from geopolitical point of view, but we are very similar. All of us, humans are. We are also similar. But in the case of Colombia and Venezuela, it's more evident because we have three huge geographical areas that unites us. That is the Guajira zone, the Andean zone, and the plains zone, all the Llanos area are common, and the rivers are all uniting us, not only the Orinoco, the system of rivers, but all the smaller rivers that are really the vehicle of communication and not the borders. So I think that's why we had Vallenato and Cumbia, like awesome influence in Venezuela. And that's why we have in all Latin America and the state Bossa Nova influence. And that's also why salsa is everywhere, because we are communicating also through the sea and the air. So in this sense, borders are a secondary topic, but culture is the first one. Thank you.
I think it's a topic for another webinar.
So I see we're coming to an end. We have a couple of questions. I don't know. I mean, I don't think what do you all think?
We can make a summary of all the remaining questions to say the final remarks, maybe.
Okay. Okay. So you'd like me to read the final questions, or is that what you said?
Yes, you can read them all, and then
we could have final remarks. Yeah, and we might go over like a minute or two. Okay, so I'll try to read them quickly. So from Erin Zaslav, she says, subsequent to migration, what structures are put into place for migrants to better assimilate to the new area? That's the first question. Second, from Afzal Habib, thanks for the discussion. In many cases, we've seen more vulnerable populations exploited through migratory labor, for example, South Asia to the Middle East, with practices that keep migrants poor. How do we ensure we can continue to support such vulnerable populations to take advantage of migration opportunity while managing the risk? That's a good question too. And then Farhan asks, because there are certain scenarios where migrants face barriers. What could be those barriers from an organizational perspective? And then Noran says, could you please throw some light on what loopholes, let's see, which can be turned into opportunity you all have experienced around the process of migration, which you feel is still a major issue? I'm asking from entrepreneurial opportunities. It's nice to be a part of the session. Oh, and Dr. Fred Willoughby says, great job, panelists. He's our department chair. Okay, so, all right, so I did like a,
I'm going to jump in because, it all has a common thread, right? Everybody's saying, look, here's the symptom, here's the problem. How do you go about doing it, right? And I know one could talk for hours and still not solve it. But I think one common thread which we tend to miss is when we have these questions, you tend to view the role of government, or you tend to view the role of private citizens, or we tend to view the role of enterprises, right? We tend to sometimes ignore the role of what we would describe as civil society. And civil society comes in various shapes and forms, right? These could be non-for-profits, these could be church groups, these could be alliances, these could be student movements, these could be universities. But essentially, it's harnessing all that enthusiasm, altruism, and private energies into public good, right? In some ways. And when you think about it, civil society can be such a powerful leveler, so that people who, if I'm a native and there's a migrant coming and I have this fear of, oh, is my job going away? Is my culture getting diluted? Civil society can become a very powerful catalyst to translate that individual anxiety or fear into some kind of a collective hope, right? Saying, look, you're coming, I've got some skills, and together we can do more. The sum of what you and I do can be greater than our individual efforts, right? We've seen that in the United States. Seema presented research to demonstrate that the whole migration story into the United States has been one of economic progress, right? The social security keeps getting fed, the entrepreneurship keeps getting better and better and sharper. And so I think if we reflect upon the role of civil society, and if governments allow civil society to strengthen and flourish, I think we could do ourselves a lot of good. And many people like Seema and me who volunteer on these organizations, have been doing it for decades. We love it. You'd be surprised how many people would be passionate about civil society, because it's not for profit and it's not for any other personal gain. It's largely to ensure good happens in the world. So I would say that that's something we could perhaps focus on a little more when painting this narrative.
Right, and then Zinnia and Seema, do you have any closing remarks?
Well,
Or anything that you'd like to add before we close?
Or saying goodbye, and I'm grateful for this opportunity. And I have to say that yes, if host communities are open for diversity and making the efforts to make absorbing newcomers and making it part of the development of countries, it will be better for all of us. It will be a win-win situation. And this is a phenomenon that is not going to stop. It is growing every day. So we have to embrace it. Keep working for the economic opportunities, legal framework, social opportunities, social integration, giving opportunities for all of us to make the migration the better for all. And as a humanitarian person, I have to highlight that solidarity and empathy. It will make us a better world always. Thank you.
Thank you, Zinnia. Thank you, Ashish. Great closing comments. I think I concur, right? I think if you look around you today, you see a certain frame of the world in which you live. That frame is changing. Migration is happening and migration is growing. There's nothing, as Zinnia said, we can do to stop. As our climate affects us more and more, we're going to find more and more migration. And at some point, I think it will accelerate to such an extent that it'll be difficult for us to really, come to terms with it. We can be either open to migration and embrace it, embrace all the things that, Ashish said regarding pluralism, 1 + 1 = 3, And if we look at the stories, we look at the statistics, we look at the research, that's how it has been, right? When we lay the pathways, when they're receiving the destination countries, whether it's faith-based, civil society, public or private enterprises, migration is a success, and it can have much more powerful impact on both the people that are migrating, the family that's migrating, and the country that's receiving them. And that's a positive impact, right? But we need to be able to embrace that. We need to be able to tell those stories. I think everybody in this webinar agrees with that view, right? Migration can be good. So how do we get involved and tell those stories? How do we, play our part, both from just being neighborly to our new migrants, but also to looking at civil society and joint action, right? So I would say I'm putting out a call of action here to say, go and assist, right? Go and assist in terms of your local governments, in terms of your, civil society organizations. Be passionate about this, because we know, and Ashish gave you exact example, that if there are receivers on the other side, the migrants will succeed, right? If those skills are provided, the migrants will succeed. And I think we can all play a role in making and underwriting that migration success.
Excellent. So thank you so much to our panelists, and thank you also to all of the attendees who are joining us from all around the world. We can share the recording of this on our cyber website. We could also email it to you as well. Be sure to share it with everyone. And as you can see, we're a little bit over time, which means that, as Ashish said, this is a topic that we could talk about all day, and it's an important one. So I'm glad that you've joined us, and we hope to maybe have a follow-up webinar in the future, and we hope you'll join us as well. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.
so much.
Thank
so
you.
much.
And
Bye.
Thank you
thanks
so
all.
much. Bye.